The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, reflecting the bioluminescent forms of 217 species. Ambassador Thexnor of the Vrelian Empire adjusted his sensory stalks as he reviewed the most recent survey data from Sector 7749. The readings were impossible to ignore any longer. A primitive world designated as Earth had been flagged for resource extraction. The planet possessed rare elements crucial for quantum drive production, and the Council had waited long enough. The human delegation had been ignored for 43 standard cycles. Their transmissions pleading for recognition went unanswered. Their attempts at establishing diplomatic channels were dismissed as the chirping of insects. The Council had encountered thousands of species throughout the galaxy, and humanity ranked among the least impressive. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their weapons were chemically propelled projectiles, and their society was fragmented into competing nations. Counselor Maravesh, a towering crystalline being from the Korath domain, activated the holographic display. Earth rotated slowly above the assembly, its blue oceans and green continents visible in sharp detail. Mining coordinates glowed red across the Pacific Ocean floor, the Siberian tundra, and deep beneath the Amazon rainforest. The extraction would be efficient. The human population would be relocated to designated zones, while automated systems stripped the planet of its valuable resources over the next 200 years. The vote proceeded without debate. 431 tentacles, appendages, and energy fields rose in approval. 7 abstained. None opposed. The decision was unanimous by Council standards. Extraction Fleet Omega-7 would depart within the solar week. Humanity would be informed of the decision as a courtesy, though their consent was not required. Lesser species had no voice in matters of galactic importance. Admiral Kreshitar of the Vrelian Armada received his orders with cold satisfaction. His fleet consisted of 300 vessels, each capable of reducing a continent to molten slag. The humans would comply or face sterilization. Either outcome was acceptable. He had overseen 47 such operations throughout his career. Species either accepted their new reality or they ceased to exist. The mathematics were simple. The human delegation on Station Axiom Prime received the formal notice at 0600 hours station time. Ambassador Sarah Chen read the document 3 times, her hands trembling as the implications became clear. The Galactic Council had granted themselves permission to strip Earth of resources, relocate humanity to controlled zones, and treat human civilization as an obstacle to be managed. Everything humanity had built over 10,000 years of history was reduced to a footnote in a mining operation proposal. Chen immediately transmitted the news to Earth. The signal would take 16 hours to reach home through the quantum relay network. She sat alone in her quarters afterward, staring at family photos displayed on her desk. Her daughter Emma was starting university next month. Her son Marcus had just been accepted into the Mars Colony Engineering program. They had futures planned, dreams to chase, lives to live. Now everything hung in the balance because humanity had been judged unworthy of consideration. On Earth, the emergency session of the United Nations convened within 6 hours of receiving the transmission. Representatives from every nation gathered in New York, their faces reflecting the same shock and outrage. Secretary General Adeyemi Okonkwo addressed the assembly with barely controlled fury. The Galactic Council had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had judged humanity based on their current technology and assumed compliance based on the behavior of other conquered species. They knew nothing of human history, human nature, or the simple fact that humanity did not kneel. President Elizabeth Morrison of the North American Union spoke next, her voice cold and measured. Humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for first contact. They had imagined scenarios ranging from peaceful trade to hostile invasion. What they had not anticipated was casual dismissal, being treated as an administrative inconvenience rather than a sovereign species. The Council had made their decision without ever speaking to humanity directly. They would learn the cost of that arrogance. The Global Defense Initiative activated protocols that had been theoretical exercises until that moment. Military installations across Earth, Mars, Luna, and the asteroid colonies switched to war footing. The human fleet, small by galactic standards but built with desperate ingenuity, began mobilizing. Fusion reactors hummed to full power. Railgun batteries loaded penetrator rounds designed to punch through capital ship armor. Missile silos opened their doors to reveal weapons humanity had hoped never to use. Dr. Sarah Kim of the Advanced Weapons Research Division worked through the night at the Geneva facility. Her team had been developing experimental technology based on theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of known science. Humanity's conventional weapons were inferior to galactic standard by centuries, but desperation bred innovation, and humanity excelled at finding creative solutions to impossible problems. The Council would discover that technological superiority meant nothing against an enemy willing to sacrifice everything. In the lunar shipyards, construction crews worked in shifts measured in hours rather than days. Every available resource was diverted to military production. Civilian transports were retrofitted with weapon systems. Mining vessels received armor plating and targeting computers. Humanity had 6 months before the extraction fleet arrived. 6 months to prepare, to plan, to transform their entire civilization into a weapon aimed at the heart of galactic arrogance. The message went out across every human colony, every station, every ship. Humanity stood at the precipice of extinction or transcendence. The Galactic Council had chosen to treat them as primitives to be managed rather than equals to be respected. They would learn the oldest lesson in human history, written in blood across 10,000 years of warfare. You could push humanity to the edge, could threaten everything they loved, could treat them with contempt and dismissal. But when you crossed that final line, when you threatened not just human lives but human dignity and sovereignty, you unleashed something the galaxy had never encountered. The fury of a species that refused to die quietly. The rage of billions who would rather burn the galaxy down than accept chains. The desperate creativity of minds that viewed impossible odds not as a reason to surrender, but as a challenge to overcome. The Galactic Council had issued their decree. Now humanity would deliver their response. Not in words or diplomatic protests, but in fire and steel, and the terrible innovation born from species-wide existential rage. Admiral Kreshitar would arrive in 6 months expecting compliance or quick resistance followed by annihilation. What he would find instead was something the galaxy had never prepared for. A species that treated survival not as a hope, but as an absolute requirement. A civilization that had climbed from caves to stars through nothing but stubborn refusal to accept limitations. The Council wanted humanity's resources. They would get humanity's fury instead. Commander Marcus Reeves stood on the observation deck of the UHSV Defiance, watching construction crews weld additional armor plating to the destroyer's hull. The ship had been designed for patrol duties and pirate suppression. Now it was being transformed into something far more dangerous. Weapon pods bristled along its flanks. Experimental railguns replaced conventional missiles, and its reactor had been pushed beyond safety limits. Every ship in humanity's modest fleet was undergoing similar modifications. The math was brutal and simple. Humanity possessed 147 combat vessels, ranging from corvettes to heavy cruisers. The Vrelian extraction fleet numbered 300 ships, each larger and more powerful than anything humans had built. Standard military doctrine would call this suicide. Standard military doctrine had not been written by humans facing extinction. Reeves studied the tactical displays, running simulations that all ended in catastrophic human losses. But losses meant nothing if the alternative was slavery. Dr. Sarah Kim's team at Geneva had achieved something remarkable in those desperate weeks. They called it the Casimir Disruptor, a weapon born from quantum physics and desperation. Traditional shields used by galactic species relied on projected energy fields to deflect or absorb incoming fire. The disruptor created a localized reality distortion that caused those shields to collapse into themselves. Testing had been limited. The theory was partially incomplete, but initial results showed promise. Against conventional defenses, it would be devastating. The technology came at a terrible price. The disruptor consumed enormous amounts of power and had a recharge time measured in hours. Each ship could mount only one unit, and the weapon's range was limited. Human vessels would need to close to knife-fighting distance with enemy capital ships, survive their superior firepower long enough to deploy the disruptor, then hope their conventional weapons could penetrate unshielded hulls. It was a strategy built on sacrifice and precision. Production facilities across Earth worked without rest. Asteroid mining colonies diverted every gram of refined materials to military construction. Mars Colony converted its terraforming equipment into weapon manufacturing. The Jovian outposts produced fuel and ammunition in quantities that would have seemed insane months earlier. Humanity poured every resource into preparation, knowing that one chance was all they would get. Success meant survival. Failure meant extinction or something worse. Ambassador Chen remained on Axiom Prime, maintaining the pretense of diplomatic normalcy while gathering intelligence. The Galactic Council operated with the casual confidence of a power that had never faced serious resistance. Their communications were barely encrypted, their strategic planning was discussed openly, and their arrival schedule was posted on public networks. They genuinely believed humanity would either surrender or provide token resistance before being crushed. Chen met regularly with representatives from minor species, those who existed on the galaxy's periphery, with little voice or influence. She listened to their stories, their histories of conquest and absorption into the Council's economic structure. The pattern was always the same. A species was discovered, assessed, and categorized. Those with valuable resources but limited military capacity were given the choice between cooperation and destruction. Most chose survival over annihilation. Their cultures were preserved in museums while their worlds were transformed into resource extraction sites. But Chen discovered something else in those conversations. Resentment. The Council ruled through overwhelming force and careful political maneuvering. But their subject species were not content. They simply lacked the means or courage to resist. Small acts of defiance occurred constantly, suppressed quickly and efficiently. The Council's stability relied on the belief that resistance was futile. If humanity somehow survived, if they proved that Council power could be challenged, it might inspire others to reconsider their submission. On Earth, the training intensified. Every able person volunteered for military service or support roles. The selection process for ship crews was brutal, because everyone understood that survival rates would be catastrophic. Commander Reeves interviewed hundreds of applicants for positions on the Defiance, each one aware that this mission would likely be their last. They came anyway. Fighter pilots, engineers, medical staff, tactical specialists, all volunteering for probable death because the alternative was unacceptable. Lieutenant Jessica Park, a fighter pilot from the Lunar Defense Force, stood before Reeves during her interview. She was 24 years old, top of her class in combat training with reflexes that bordered on superhuman. Her file indicated exceptional performance in every category. Reeves asked her the same question he asked everyone. Why volunteer for a mission with minimal survival probability? Her answer was immediate and unflinching. Because someone had to fight, and she refused to let fear make her decisions. The Defiance would carry 280 crew members into battle. Each one knew the odds. Each one reported for duty anyway. They trained for scenarios where their ship was crippled, where multiple systems failed simultaneously, where victory required pushing beyond every safety limit and operating in conditions that would kill them slowly. They practiced tactics designed around assuming their own deaths, where the goal was not to survive, but to inflict maximum damage before being destroyed. Humanity's strategy began taking shape through thousands of hours of simulation and planning. The Vrelian fleet would arrive expecting either immediate surrender or disorganized resistance. Instead, they would face coordinated precision strikes aimed at specific vessel types. Human ships would target command vessels first, attempting to create confusion in enemy leadership. The Casimir disruptors would be reserved for capital ships, the massive dreadnoughts that served as fleet anchors. Fighter craft would swarm damaged vessels, exploiting any weakness with suicidal determination. The plan required perfect timing, absolute coordination, and luck that bordered on divine intervention. Human forces would be outnumbered and outgunned in every engagement. Their only advantages were desperation, innovation, and the element of surprise. The Council expected primitives with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. They would face railguns firing at relativistic speeds, quantum disruptors tearing apart shield matrices, and fighters piloted by humans who viewed their own survival as optional, if it meant taking enemies with them. President Morrison addressed the combined military command from the Situation Room deep beneath Geneva. Her words were transmitted to every human vessel, every colony, every military installation. The Galactic Council had made a fundamental error in judgment. They had assessed humanity's technology and assumed they understood human capability. They had no concept of human history. Of the countless times humanity had faced extinction and somehow survived through sheer stubborn refusal to accept death, the Council would learn that lesson in Fire and Blood. General James Martinez, Supreme Commander of United Earth Forces, laid out the final operational plan. Phase 1 would begin the moment Vrelian ships entered the Sol system. Human forces would strike immediately, abandoning any pretense of negotiation or delay. Every second of hesitation gave the enemy time to deploy, to establish defensive positions, to bring their superior numbers to bear. The attack would be sudden, vicious, and completely contrary to every first contact protocol the Council had ever encountered. The countdown began. 6 months became 6 weeks, became 6 days. Human civilization held its breath, knowing that everything would change soon. Children went to school wondering if they would have homes tomorrow. Workers reported to factories producing weapons that might save or doom their species. Scientists pushed experimental technology beyond safe limits because safety was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. The entire species existed in a state of controlled terror and determination. Admiral Kreshitar departed Vrelian space with Extraction Fleet Omega-7 exactly on schedule. His 300 vessels traveled through quantum fold space, covering distances that would take conventional drives centuries. He reviewed the human assessment reports during the journey, finding nothing concerning. The species was divided, technologically inferior, and completely isolated in galactic terms. The operation would be concluded within solar weeks. Another primitive world would be brought into Council control. Another species would learn their place in the galactic order. The Admiral had no concept of what awaited him. He could not imagine a species that would rather die than submit. He had never encountered a civilization that viewed impossible odds as motivation rather than deterrent. His experience taught him that all species valued survival above sovereignty. That fear was a universal constant. He was about to learn that humanity defined fear differently, not as a reason to surrender but as fuel for rage. The Vrelian fleet emerged from quantum fold space at the edge of the Sol system. With practiced precision, 300 warships materialized in perfect formation, their arrival calculated to demonstrate overwhelming force. Admiral Kreshitar observed the primitive star system through his command vessel's sensors, noting the single inhabited planet and its modest collection of orbital stations. The humans had constructed defensive platforms around their homeworld, a predictable response that would prove utterly inadequate. Standard protocol required the Admiral to broadcast terms of compliance before initiating hostile action. The Council preferred willing cooperation to costly battles, even against inferior opponents. Kreshitar activated the communication system, preparing to deliver the ultimatum that had convinced 47 other species to accept Council authority. His message was clear and simple: surrender all military assets, accept relocation protocols, and permit resource extraction to proceed without interference. Resistance would result in complete planetary sterilization. The human response came within seconds, far faster than diplomatic protocol normally allowed. General Martinez appeared on the display, his expression cold and controlled. His words were brief and absolute. Humanity rejected the Council's authority, refused all terms of compliance, and formally declared war against the Vrelian Empire and any Council forces supporting this invasion. The transmission ended before Kreshitar could respond, replaced by targeting data as every defensive installation in the Sol system locked weapons on his fleet. The Admiral had exactly 3 seconds to process this unexpected defiance before human forces attacked. The defensive platforms opened fire simultaneously, railguns launching tungsten penetrators at velocities approaching .02 light speed. The projectiles crossed the distance to Vrelian vessels in heartbeats, impacting shields with kinetic energy that staggered even capital ships. Kreshitar's formation scattered as captains reacted to the surprising aggression, their careful deployment dissolving into chaos. Human warships emerged from concealment positions throughout the system. They had been hiding in asteroid fields behind planetary bodies, powered down to minimal signatures. Now they ignited fusion drives and accelerated toward the Vrelian fleet with reckless speed. Commander Reeves watched his tactical display aboard the Defiance as 147 human vessels charged 300 enemy ships. The math remained terrible. The odds remained impossible. None of that mattered anymore. The battle began with brutal intensity. Vrelian vessels recovered from their initial surprise and returned fire with weapons designed to crack planetary crusts. Energy beams capable of melting cities carved through space, seeking human ships that darted and weaved with desperate agility. The first human losses came within minutes. The corvette Resolute took a direct hit that vaporized its forward section. The destroyer Vengeance died when its reactor containment failed under sustained bombardment. Humanity was bleeding, but they were making the enemy pay for every kill. Lieutenant Park flew her fighter through hell, leading a squadron of 30 craft against a Vrelian cruiser. The enemy vessel was 4 times the size of the largest human warship, its shields absorbing fire that would obliterate smaller ships. Park's squadron scattered as point defense systems tracked them. Losing 2 fighters before closing to attack range, she activated her weapon system, feeling the familiar kick as missiles launched toward the cruiser's shield emitters. Direct confrontation was suicide. They needed to be smarter, faster, more willing to take insane risks. The human battle plan was revealing its terrible genius. While larger vessels engaged the Vrelian main fleet, fighter squadrons focused on disabling specific systems: shield generators, weapon batteries, sensor arrays, anything that could degrade enemy combat effectiveness. Losses were catastrophic, but each successful strike weakened the enemy's advantage. Park watched 3 more fighters from her squadron die in bright explosions, their sacrifices buying seconds for others to press attacks home. Aboard the Defiance, Commander Reeves waited for his moment. The ship had taken minor damage from grazing hits, but its Casimir disruptor remained operational. His target was a Vrelian dreadnought, a massive vessel serving as the Admiral's command ship. Standard shields protected it from conventional weapons, but the disruptor would change that equation. Reeves ordered maximum acceleration directly toward the dreadnought, knowing this approach would draw concentrated fire from every nearby enemy vessel. The Defiance shuddered under impacts that would have destroyed her without the additional armor plating. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space. The medical bay reported casualties. Engineering struggled to maintain power to critical systems. Reeves ignored damage reports, focusing entirely on closing the distance. 5,000 kilometers. 3,000. Within disruptor range. He gave the order and the weapon fired, sending a pulse of reality-distorting energy toward the dreadnought's shield matrix. For a critical second, nothing happened. Then the dreadnought's shields collapsed inward, generators overloading as they tried to maintain fields that no longer followed normal physics. The massive vessel was suddenly vulnerable, its hull exposed to weapons fire. Reeves immediately ordered all railguns to fire, launching every available penetrator round at the unprotected dreadnought. Tungsten rods traveling at relativistic speeds punched through armor plating that would have withstood nuclear weapons, creating massive internal damage. Admiral Kreshitar felt his command vessel shake under impacts that should have been impossible. His shields had failed completely, systems he had relied upon throughout his career simply ceasing to function. Damage reports flooded his command center, describing catastrophic failures across multiple decks. Engineering reported containment warnings on the main reactor. Weapons control was offline. The humans had somehow neutralized his flagship with a single incomprehensible weapon. The Admiral ordered immediate withdrawal, recognizing that his forces had encountered something beyond their tactical experience. The humans were not fighting to win through superior force. They were fighting to inflict maximum damage regardless of cost to themselves. Every human vessel seemed piloted by crew willing to die if it meant taking enemies with them. Their weapons were inferior by centuries, but their tactics compensated through sheer desperate innovation and suicidal courage. Vrelian vessels began pulling back, attempting to reform their scattered formation beyond human weapons range. But humanity gave them no respite. Human ships pursued with fusion drives pushed beyond safe limits, their crews accepting radiation exposure and system failures to maintain contact. Fighters swarmed damaged enemy vessels, exploiting every weakness with weapons that seemed insignificant until concentrated in overwhelming numbers. The first hour of battle cost humanity 38 ships and thousands of lives. But the Vrelian fleet had lost 47 vessels outright, with dozens more severely damaged, including the Admiral's flagship. The exchange ratio favored the Council forces, but barely, and that fact sent shockwaves through Kreshitar's remaining captains. Primitives with inferior technology were achieving near parity through tactics and determination that defied all military logic. Dr. Kim watched the battle from Geneva Command Center, monitoring Casimir disruptor performance across the fleet. 7 units had been deployed successfully, each one collapsing enemy shields long enough for follow-up strikes to cause critical damage. 3 units had failed, their experimental technology unable to handle combat stress. 4 ships carrying disruptors had been destroyed before reaching firing positions. The weapon was effective but costly, requiring human vessels to close to near suicidal range before deployment. President Morrison stood beside General Martinez, watching casualty reports accumulate with each passing minute. Every lost ship represented hundreds of lives, people who had volunteered knowing they might not return. The numbers were climbing steadily. 38 ships lost became 41, then 45. But the Vrelian fleet was also hemorrhaging, losing vessels at a rate no council force had experienced in living memory. Humanity was proving a point written in fire and blood. Ambassador Chen monitored the battle from Axiom Prime, her communications with Earth limited by distance and signal delay. Reports arrived hours after events occurred, creating a surreal disconnection between what she knew and what was happening. The minor species representatives contacted her constantly, seeking information about how humans were achieving such impossible results. Their questions revealed something crucial. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time in Council history, a primitive species was not being crushed immediately. The battle continued through the long hours as both fleets maneuvered, attacked, died. Human forces employed tactics that would have seemed insane to Council military theorists. Ships would operate until catastrophically damaged, then deliberately ram enemy vessels in final acts of defiance. Fighters with depleted weapons became missiles themselves, pilots aiming for critical systems before ejecting at the last possible second. Humanity fought like a wounded animal, all fangs and fury with no concept of surrender. Admiral Kreshitar watched his tactical display with growing horror as his numerical superiority eroded. The battle entered its 6th hour with both fleets bloodied and exhausted. Humanity had lost 63 warships, nearly half their total fleet strength. Thousands of crew members had died in the cold vacuum of space, their vessels transformed into expanding clouds of debris. But the Vrelian fleet had suffered proportionally worse. 89 ships destroyed, including 3 capital vessels and Admiral Kreshitar's crippled flagship. The formation that had entered Sol system with overwhelming confidence now struggled to maintain cohesion. Commander Reeves assessed the Defiance's condition with grim satisfaction. The destroyer had survived its attack run against the Dreadnought, though barely. Hull integrity was compromised across 4 decks. Life support was operating at 60% capacity. The Casimir disruptor had burned out during its single firing, leaving the weapon inoperable. But his crew remained functional. His ship could still fight, and enemy blood had been spilled. That made every sacrifice worthwhile. Lieutenant Park's fighter squadron had been reduced to 11 craft from the original 30. She flew with mechanical precision now. Emotions locked away because feeling anything would be crippling. Friends had died in bright flashes of light. People she had trained with, laughed with, shared hopes and fears with were simply gone. Their deaths bought time, created opportunities, enabled victories measured in destroyed enemy systems. She honored their sacrifice by continuing to fight with cold efficiency. The Vrelian fleet attempted to establish a defensive perimeter beyond Earth's orbit, seeking to regroup and repair critical systems. Admiral Kreshitar had relocated his command to the cruiser Relentless after abandoning his devastated flagship. His tactical staff worked frantically to restore order from chaos, reorganizing scattered vessels into coherent formations. The humans had bloodied them severely, but Council forces still maintained numerical superiority. Victory remained achievable if they could stabilize the situation, but humanity refused to allow that respite. General Martinez ordered continued aggressive action despite catastrophic losses. Human vessels pursued the Vrelian fleet with relentless determination, harrying their formations, preventing effective repairs, maintaining pressure that prevented the enemy from regaining their initial advantage. The strategy was costly, burning through ammunition and lives with brutal efficiency, but it kept the Council forces off balance and defensive. The battle's intensity attracted attention across the galaxy. Quantum communication relays carried news of the engagement to Council space, where military analysts struggled to explain how primitives were achieving such results. Species that had surrendered without significant resistance watched in stunned silence as humanity fought with determination that seemed divorced from rational calculation. The broadcasts revealed something the Council had never adequately considered. Some species valued freedom more than survival. Ambassador Chen leveraged this attention brilliantly from her position on Axiom Prime. She broadcast uncensored footage of the battle to every species with access to Council networks, accompanied by simple messages. Humanity had asked only for recognition and respect. The Council had responded with invasion and threats of extinction. Now humans were proving that even overwhelming force could be resisted by those unwilling to accept subjugation. Her broadcasts could not change the battle's outcome, but they planted seeds of doubt in civilizations that had accepted Council authority without question. On Earth, President Morrison addressed her population with remarkable composure, given the circumstances. She acknowledged the terrible losses, honored the sacrifice of those fighting in space, and reinforced humanity's commitment to resistance regardless of cost. Her words were broadcast to every remaining human vessel, every colony, every defensive installation. They would fight until victory or extinction, because submission was not an option humanity would entertain. The Council had made this choice for them, and humanity would ensure they regretted that decision. Dr. Kim's team at Geneva continued analyzing battle data, searching for any advantage that might shift the engagement's outcome. The Casimir disruptors had proven effective but limited. Only 3 remained operational across the surviving fleet. Human conventional weapons were sufficient to damage unshielded vessels, but breaking through intact shields remained nearly impossible. The team worked desperately to develop improvements, modifications, anything that might increase humanity's chances before the fleet was completely destroyed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young physicist named David Chen, no relation to Ambassador Chen, proposed a modification to railgun munitions. Standard penetrator rounds relied purely on kinetic energy, but if they incorporated shaped nuclear charges triggered by proximity sensors, they could potentially overwhelm shield generators through multiple simultaneous impacts. The explosions would be small, barely kiloton yield, but concentrated against specific shield emitter locations. Theory suggested this might work. Testing was impossible given time constraints. General Martinez approved immediate implementation without hesitation. Humanity was losing ships faster than they were destroying enemy vessels. The exchange ratio had turned against them as Vrelian forces adapted to human tactics. Conventional approaches would result in fleet annihilation within hours. The modified munitions represented a desperate gamble, but desperation had become humanity's defining characteristic. Production facilities across Earth and Mars began modifying railgun rounds according to Chen's specifications. The new ammunition reached the fleet within 90 minutes through emergency supply runs by fast courier vessels. Commander Reeves received his allocation aboard the Defiance, studying the technical specifications with exhausted hope. The theory was sound, but theory and combat reality often diverged catastrophically. His tactical officer loaded the modified rounds into their surviving railguns, preparing to test humanity's latest innovation against enemies who still outnumbered them substantially. Admiral Kreshitar had finally restored order to his battered fleet. 197 vessels remained combat effective, arranged in defensive formations designed to maximize overlapping shield coverage and supporting fire. He had lost nearly a third of his force to primitives, who should have been crushed in the opening engagement. The casualties were unacceptable, the damage to Council prestige was catastrophic, but the situation remained salvageable. He would destroy the human fleet, then proceed with planetary bombardment until their government surrendered unconditionally. The human attack resumed with familiar desperation, but something new in its execution. Ships approached in coordinated assault patterns, concentrating fire on specific enemy vessels rather than dispersing damage across the fleet. Modified railgun rounds struck Vrelian shields and detonated, small nuclear explosions creating chain reactions in shield matrices. The effect was dramatic and immediate. Shields that had withstood sustained conventional fire collapsed under the modified ammunition's combined kinetic and explosive force. Lieutenant Park witnessed a Vrelian battlecruiser's shields fail completely as human railgun rounds detonated across its defensive perimeter. The vessel attempted emergency power redistribution, but human fighters were already exploiting the vulnerability. Park led her remaining squadron directly toward the exposed battlecruiser, launching missiles at point-blank range before hard banking to avoid defensive fire. The battlecruiser staggered under multiple impacts, its hull splitting as internal explosions propagated through critical systems. The tide of battle shifted perceptibly. Human forces were still outnumbered and outgunned, but the modified ammunition transformed railguns from harassment weapons into legitimate threats. Freljin captains watched their reliable shields fail repeatedly, leaving vessels vulnerable to follow-up strikes that caused terrible damage. Admiral Kreshtar observed his fleet's combat effectiveness degrading despite numerical superiority. The humans had adapted, innovated, found new ways to kill his ships using inferior technology, enhanced by desperate creativity. Commander Reeves pushed the Defiance into close engagement with a Vrelian destroyer, his railguns firing modified rounds in controlled bursts. The enemy vessel's shields flickered and died under the nuclear-enhanced bombardment. Reeves immediately ordered conventional penetrators to target the destroyer's reactor section. Tungsten rods punched through unprotected hull plating, and the Vrelian destroyer erupted in a brilliant explosion as its containment failed. One more enemy eliminated, one more small step toward impossible victory. The battle continued through its 10th hour with both fleets near complete exhaustion. Humanity had lost 79 vessels, leaving only 68 ships still capable of combat operations. But the Vrelian fleet had been reduced to 143 functional warships, their losses mounting as human tactics and modified weapons took cumulative tolls. The exchange ratio had equalized, then slowly tilted in humanity's favor, as desperation transformed into grim effectiveness. Admiral Kreshtar faced an impossible decision. His fleet still held numerical advantage, but that advantage was eroding steadily. Human resistance had not weakened despite catastrophic losses. Their tactics grew more effective as they learned from each engagement. The exhaustion aboard the Defiance was absolute. Commander Reeves had been awake for 16 hours, operating on stimulants and pure determination. His bridge crew showed similar signs of strain, their faces pale from stress and radiation exposure. The destroyer had taken additional damage in recent engagements, leaving entire sections exposed to vacuum. 73 crew members had died since the battle began, their bodies committed to space because there was no time for proper ceremonies. But the ship remained functional, its weapons still fired, and its crew refused to quit. Lieutenant Park brought her fighter back to the carrier Valiant for emergency rearming. Only 6 craft from her original 30 remained operational. The losses played constantly in her mind despite efforts to maintain emotional distance. She had watched people die, their fighters torn apart by weapons fire or consumed in explosions too bright to witness directly. Each death diminished something in her soul, but she continued flying because stopping meant dishonoring their sacrifice. Her hands shook as deck crews loaded fresh missiles, fatigue and stress finally overwhelming her trained composure. Admiral Kreshtar reviewed casualty reports with growing horror. 129 vessels remained from his original 300, and many of those were severely damaged. His crew was exhausted, ammunition stocks depleted by half and morale crumbling as captains realized they were not facing primitives, but warriors who refused to acknowledge defeat. The humans had lost more ships in absolute numbers, but their remaining forces fought with increased ferocity rather than diminished capacity. The communication from the Galactic Council arrived precisely when the Admiral needed it least. Counselor Maravesh appeared on his display, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that conveyed official authority. She demanded explanation for why a simple extraction operation had become a protracted military engagement. The Council was receiving reports from across the galaxy about the battle, and subject species were openly discussing resistance for the first time in centuries. Kreshtar was ordered to conclude operations immediately and restore Council prestige through decisive victory. The Admiral explained the situation with barely controlled frustration. The humans possessed unexpected technological capabilities, fought with suicidal determination, and adapted tactics faster than any species he had encountered. His fleet had suffered catastrophic losses attempting to suppress resistance that should have collapsed hours ago. Continuing the engagement would likely result in mutual annihilation, with humanity destroyed but Council forces completely eliminated. He requested reinforcements or permission to withdraw and regroup. Counselor Maravesh denied both requests with cold finality. Reinforcements would take weeks to arrive, and withdrawal would demonstrate weakness before the entire galaxy. Every subject species was watching this engagement, evaluating whether Council authority could be challenged. If humanity survived this confrontation, it would inspire resistance movements across 1,000 worlds. The Admiral would complete his mission regardless of cost. Failure would result in charges of incompetence and disgrace. The Council had spoken. General Martinez intercepted the communication through human intelligence assets that had been quietly monitoring Council transmissions. Ambassador Chen had provided encryption keys obtained from sympathetic minor species who wanted to see the Council challenged. The decoded message revealed everything humanity needed to know. The Council was terrified of appearing weak. They would sacrifice the entire Vrelian fleet, rather than admit a primitive species could resist their authority. That desperation created opportunity. Martinez immediately contacted President Morrison with a proposal that was either brilliant or insane. The battle had reached equilibrium, with both sides capable of destroying each other but neither able to achieve clean victory. Humanity could not defeat the remaining Vrelian vessels without being annihilated in the process. But if they could force a stalemate, if they could make the cost of victory so catastrophic that the Council had to reconsider, humanity might survive. The key was demonstrating that continued conflict would guarantee mutual destruction. Dr. Kim's team had been developing another weapon during the battle, something even more desperate than the Casimir disruptor. They called it the Hawking device, a theoretical weapon based on micro-black hole generation. The science was barely understood. The testing was non-existent, and deployment would likely kill everyone in the immediate vicinity, including the crew operating it. But if it worked, it would create a gravitational anomaly capable of consuming entire fleets regardless of shields or armor. A weapon of absolute mutual destruction, the device required enormous power generation beyond any single ship's capacity. Dr. Kim proposed linking the reactors of 5 vessels together through emergency power transfer systems, creating a distributed energy network. The ships would need to maintain formation while under fire, feeding power to a single vessel mounting the weapon. If any ship in the network was destroyed, the system would fail. If the enemy targeted the weapon vessel directly, the detonation would occur prematurely. Success required precision, coordination, and luck that defied probability. Commander Reeves volunteered the Defiance to mount the weapon without hesitation. His ship was already heavily damaged. Its crew depleted, its combat effectiveness diminished. Using the destroyer as the weapon platform meant accepting certain destruction, but that sacrifice might save Earth and prove humanity's point. The crew voted unanimously to accept the mission when Reeves explained the situation. They had come to fight, to resist, to show the galaxy that humanity would not kneel. Dying to achieve that goal seemed appropriate. The device was constructed in 6 hours using components stripped from destroyed vessels and experimental technology never intended for field deployment. Installation teams worked in vacuum, welding the weapon directly to the Defiance's hull because there was no time for proper integration. The reactor linking systems were cobbled together from emergency power cables and prayer. Dr. Kim transmitted activation codes with explicit warnings. Once initiated, the device could not be stopped. Detonation would occur in 90 seconds, regardless of circumstances. Lieutenant Park received orders to provide fighter cover for the Defiance and its network of linked vessels. Her remaining squadron would screen the formation from enemy attacks while the weapon charged. She understood the implications immediately. Everyone involved in this operation would die. The fighters screening the formation, the crews maintaining power transfer, the personnel aboard the Defiance. They were creating a doomsday weapon and delivering it personally. Her response was simple and immediate. Understood. Moving to position, General Martinez broadcast a message to Admiral Kreshtar on all available frequencies. The content was brief and absolute. Humanity had developed a weapon capable of destroying both fleets simultaneously. They preferred peace and were willing to negotiate withdrawal terms that preserved dignity for both sides. But if the Vrelian fleet attempted to continue combat operations or threaten Earth, humanity would detonate the weapon and ensure mutual annihilation. The choice belonged to the Admiral. Kreshtar received the message with mixed reactions. His tactical staff dismissed it as bluff, arguing that no species would develop weapons guaranteeing their own destruction. But the Admiral had been fighting humans for 12 hours and learned to respect their capacity for desperate innovation. They had already demonstrated weapons his analysts thought impossible. Their tactics defied military logic. Their determination transcended rational calculation. If they claimed to possess a mutual destruction weapon, he believed them. The Defiance moved into position with 4 other human vessels maintaining tight formation. Emergency power cables stretched between ships, pulsing with energy as reactors synchronized their output. The weapon on the destroyer's hull began emitting radiation signatures that Vrelian sensors detected immediately. Analysis indicated massive energy concentration beyond anything human technology should accomplish. Tactical computers projected probable weapon effects and returned results that made the Admiral's blood freeze. If the humans were telling truth, that device would consume everything within 10 million kilometers. Commander Reeves watched his reactor output climb to dangerous levels as power flooded from the linked vessels. The Defiance was never designed to channel this much energy. Systems were overloading across the ship, bulkheads glowing red from waste heat, crew members evacuating sections that had become uninhabitable. He maintained position through pure will and expert piloting, knowing that any deviation would break the power transfer network and abort the weapon sequence. His crew had 90 seconds to live once activation began, but they were buying Earth a chance at survival. Lieutenant Park's squadron engaged Vrelian fighters attempting to reach the Defiance formation. The dogfight was brief and vicious, human pilots trading their lives to prevent enemy craft from breaking through. Park watched 2 more fighters from her squadron die, their pilots screaming defiance over communication channels before their vessels exploded. The ceasefire took effect immediately, weapons falling silent across the battlefield as both fleets began disengaging. Commander Reeves initiated shutdown procedures for the Hawking device with hands that shook from exhaustion and relief. The weapon had never been fully activated, its energy signatures carefully calibrated to appear functional, while remaining safely below actual detonation threshold. The bluff had worked, but barely. If Admiral Kreshitar had called their gamble, everyone in the Sol system would have died together. The Defiance limped back toward Earth orbit with 4 other vessels maintaining formation around it. The emergency power transfer systems had nearly destroyed all 5 ships, their reactors pushed beyond any safe operating parameters. Radiation levels throughout the vessels exceeded survivable limits, meaning most crew members would face long-term health consequences. But they were alive, Earth was safe, and humanity had achieved something the galaxy thought impossible. They had forced a Galactic Council fleet to retreat. Lieutenant Park guided her damaged fighter toward the carrier Valiant, her fuel reserves nearly depleted and life support systems failing. She was the only survivor from her original 30-pilot squadron. 29 friends and comrades had died buying time, creating opportunities, screening critical operations. Their names would be engraved on monuments, their sacrifices remembered. But that knowledge provided cold comfort. Park felt hollow, exhausted beyond any physical fatigue, her soul worn thin by too much death witnessed too quickly. President Morrison addressed humanity from the United Nations building, her voice carrying across every human settlement in the Sol system. They had faced extinction and survived through courage, innovation, and absolute refusal to accept subjugation. 79 warships had been destroyed, over 20,000 military personnel had died, and countless others would suffer from radiation exposure and injuries. The cost had been catastrophic. But humanity remained free, their sovereignty acknowledged through force of arms rather than council generosity. The Vrelian fleet withdrew beyond Jupiter's orbit exactly as agreed, their departure monitored by every functioning human sensor in the system. Admiral Kreshitar transmitted final communications to General Martinez, his message surprisingly respectful given the circumstances. The humans had fought with honor and determination worthy of any warrior species. He would report to the Council that humanity possessed military capabilities sufficient to defend their sovereignty. What happened next would be decided by politicians, but the Admiral personally hoped for peace. Ambassador Chen watched events unfold from Axiom Prime with satisfaction that bordered on vindication. The minor species representatives contacted her constantly, seeking details about how humanity had achieved the impossible. Their questions revealed shifted perspectives across the galaxy. For the first time in living memory, a newly discovered species had resisted Council authority and survived. The implications were enormous, threatening to destabilize power structures that had existed for millennia. The Galactic Council convened emergency session within hours of receiving Admiral Kreshitar's report. Councillor Maravesh demanded complete information about the engagement, her crystalline form flickering with patterns indicating severe agitation. The Admiral's report was clear but disturbing. Humanity possessed unexpected technological capabilities, fought with determination that defied military logic, and demonstrated willingness to accept mutual destruction rather than submit. Continuing hostilities would require significant force, deployment with uncertain outcomes. Debate consumed the council chamber as representatives from 217 species argued about humanity's status. Conservative factions demanded immediate military response to restore council prestige. Progressive elements suggested negotiation and recognition of human sovereignty. The minor species, emboldened by humanity's resistance, spoke openly about reviewing their own relationships with council authority. The political situation was deteriorating rapidly, consensus fragmenting under pressure that no one had anticipated. Thexenor of the Vrelian Empire proposed compromise that eventually gained majority support. Humanity would be granted provisional sovereign status with protected territory encompassing the Sol system. They would be admitted to the Galactic Council as observers without voting rights for 50 standard cycles. During this probationary period, humanity could develop their civilization without interference, while the Council assessed their long-term intentions. Trade and cultural exchange would be permitted under supervised conditions. Ambassador Chen received the proposal with careful consideration. The terms were more generous than humanity could have hoped for before the battle, though still less than full recognition. But accepting provisional status gave humanity time to recover, rebuild their fleet, and establish relationships with other species. They could use these 50 cycles to strengthen their position, develop better technology, and transform from isolated primitives to galactic power. She transmitted the proposal to Earth with recommendations for acceptance. President Morrison convened her Security Council to debate the offer. General Martinez argued for acceptance, noting that humanity needed time to recover from catastrophic losses. Dr. Kim suggested using the probationary period to advance their technology beyond current galactic standards. The Council voted unanimously to accept provisional status while maintaining military readiness in case the Galactic Council proved treacherous. Humanity would join galactic civilization, but on alert and prepared to fight again if necessary. The formal announcement came 3 days after the battle's conclusion. Humanity was recognized as a sovereign species with protected territory and observer status on the Galactic Council. Ambassador Chen would represent human interests in all galactic affairs. Trade agreements would be negotiated through proper diplomatic channels. Resource extraction operations in the Sol system were permanently prohibited. The Council acknowledged human military capability and agreed to peaceful coexistence contingent on humanity. Respecting galactic law, Commander Reeves attended the memorial service for the Defiance's fallen crew members in person, despite doctors recommending extended medical treatment. He stood before 280 names engraved on black stone, each representing someone who had served under his command. 73 had died during the battle, fighting impossible odds because surrender was not acceptable. Their sacrifice had bought Earth's freedom, proven humanity's worth, and changed galactic politics forever. He saluted the memorial with tears streaming down his face. Lieutenant Park visited the fighter pilot memorial at Lunar Base Tranquility, where 29 new names joined thousands of others who had died defending humanity. She traced her fingers across familiar names, remembering faces and voices of people who would never grow old. Her squadron had achieved the highest kill ratio in the entire engagement, their sacrifice enabling critical operations that saved Earth. Military command wanted to award her medals and commendations. She wanted only to forget the horror of watching friends die repeatedly while being unable to save them. Dr. Kim's team began immediate work on next-generation weapons technology, using data collected during the battle. The Casimir disruptor had proven effective but limited. The Hawking device had worked as deterrent despite being largely theoretical. But humanity needed reliable weapons that could compete with galactic standard technology. She established research programs focused on understanding Council weapons systems, developing countermeasures, and creating innovations that would give humanity advantages beyond desperate gambles and suicidal tactics. The political aftermath within the Galactic Council proved more significant than the battle itself. Minor species began demanding reviews of their own status and treatment. Several civilizations formally requested observer status, similar to humanity's provisional arrangement. The Korath domain faced internal dissent as subjugated populations questioned why they had surrendered without resistance. The Council's authority, unquestioned for millennia, suddenly seemed vulnerable to challenge from species willing to pay the terrible cost of resistance. Councillor Maravesh watched her carefully constructed political order deteriorate with each passing cycle. Humanity had demonstrated that council power relied on subject species accepting their inferior status without question. Once that assumption was challenged, once primitives proved resistance was possible, the entire system became unstable. She had advocated for crushing humanity immediately to prevent exactly this scenario. Now she would spend decades managing consequences of the Council's failure to eliminate the threat when it first appeared. Ambassador Chen took her seat in the Council Observer section with quiet satisfaction. She wore a simple black suit rather than elaborate formal wear, favored by Council members, a deliberate statement that humanity valued function over decoration. When recognized for her first official address, she spoke briefly and clearly. Humanity was grateful for provisional recognition, but looked forward to earning full sovereign status. They hoped for peaceful cooperation with all species but remained prepared to defend themselves if threatened. The galaxy had learned one important lesson. Humanity did not kneel.